Hi, and welcome to the Week 4 previews for Hyper Juken's second set, Power Surge. As with last time, we will be doing 3 videos for the final 2 weeks, one per colour, starting with Yellow and D-Stinger's Impact Form 1. Continuing the themes of Taichi's Retribution Form 1, Impact Form 1 gives your opponent a consequence for blocking your attack with a hit effect. This time it gives all of your attacks with hit effects chip 1. If they're blocked, your opponent takes 1 chip damage. All but one attack in D-Stinger's arsenal has a hit effect, so you can consider most every attack in your arsenal to have chip 1. While Impact Form 1 doesn't scale with the level or power of your attacks, it's also a lot looser than Retribution Form 1's effect in that it doesn't require the hit effect of your attack to be original. If you can give all of your attacks a hit effect, they all gain chip 1. Chip 1 adds up over time, easily the equivalent of an additional level 1 attack inflicting full combat damage, if not more, and gives D-Stinger some battle momentum even when his attack is blocked. Impact Form 1 can add a lot to hit-focused strategies. The breaker cards of the new challenges were a cycle focused on damage prevention and minor effects related to Hyper. In Power Surge, their functionality is expanded upon with stronger effects, starting with Key Swipe Guard. Key Swipe Guard looks like your normal breaker block card on first glance. You can use its breaker effect when it's revealed as combat damage, and it prevents the next 3 combat damage your opponent's current attack would inflict. However, you may only use the additional effect of Key Swipe Guard should its effect prevent all remaining damage that attack would inflict. That effect, inflict 2 effect damage to your opponent, then remove it regardless should you use its breaker effect. You will get to use this effect a lot of the time, as 3 damage will be enough to prevent all remaining damage from the average attack. 2 effect damage is also a pretty good chunk of damage, 5% of your opponent's starting arsenal. And as said with both chip and poison damage, every little bit adds up to a large whole. Golden Diving Double Axe Handle is Yellow's first level 2 attack, and probably the card with the longest name in Hyper Juken. 6 POW, the standard of level 2 attacks, Double Axe Handle raises your Hyper 2, then should it hit, lower your opponent's Hyper 2, and cause your opponent to become stunned. Golden Diving Double Axe Handle has a similar utility to Mark's Supreme Chokeslam at the cost of being slower on virtue of being level 2, set up into a hyper attack. Except that's not what it's doing here. It's playing into Hyper D-Stinger's effect to search for Stinger Shot and have your opponent need to pay a cost to block that Stinger Shot. Golden Diving Double Axe Handle can even be used with 7 Hyper in the same manner as Supreme Chokeslam due to timing. Raise your Hyper to have D-Stinger become a Hyper Fighter. Then, after it hits and your opponent becomes stunned, trigger Hyper D-Stinger's effect. D-Stinger is also not the only fighter that can appreciate a perfectly timed double Golden Axe Handle, so keep that in mind. Today we look at a new Carter, Breaker, and attack for Louise, the last of which brings a new attribute to Hyper Juken. Let's get flapping. In Hyper Juken, you can be caught off guard when your opponent initiates combat, having to think quickly with whatever hand you're dealt. Adaptive Form 2 gives you a little more preparedness going into combat. When your opponent initiates combat, you get to look at the top 2 cards of your arsenal, then place any amount on the top and the remainder on the bottom of your arsenal, half of what you would have looked at had it been your prepare phase. Adaptive Form 2 makes a massive difference in the quality of your hand going into combat, being able to get rid of up to 2 cards you can't use, or better set up your intended combos. For Louise, this is assembling a hand with both a block and lightning blast, but will greatly expand as the game progresses. It also does a great job at trying to secure that first level 0 for you if your opponent goes all out on the first turn of the game. The power of Adaptive Form 2 might not be immediately apparent, but it will find itself a place in competitive play. Persevering Guard is much like Key Swap Guard from the last preview, a break a block card that when revealed as combat damage, it may prevent the next 3 combat damage your opponent's current attack would inflict. Then if it prevented all remaining damage, you get an additional effect. Persevering Guard heals you 2 at the start of your next action that combat. While it's nice to prevent additional damage as all breakers do, with Persevering Guard you can actually end up taking no damage overall, or even with more cards in your arsenal than what you started with. It can also be really opportune at times. If you hit something you needed prior as combat damage, the effect of Persevering Guard can heal it, or heal a card with an effect triggered by being healed from your exhaust. Persevering Guard is a pretty nifty breaker card, sure to see a considerable amount of play, especially in pure blue builds. Resolute Dual Ki Blasts is our first attack with a substandard power rating, its power being 3 instead of the standard 4 for a level 1 attack. But that doesn't mean its power stays substandard. With the new challenges, you saw the start of a cycle of 3 attributes designed to push through highly defensive playstyles. Chip, shared by red and yellow, an anti-block card attribute. Precision, shared by yellow and blue, an anti-effect attribute. With Power Surge, the triangle is complete with Empower, an attribute shared by blue and red. When an attack with Empower is blocked by a block card, you can pay 1 key, and if you do, that attack becomes empowered. Then your opponent may pay key equal to the level of the attack, or their block card is cancelled. When a card is cancelled, its block effects cannot be used, then it is sent straight to its owner's exhaust, while the attack continues as if it had never been blocked. Your opponent cannot attempt to block that attack again. Resolute Dual Ki Blasts has a hit effect to lower your opponent's Hyper 3, something that will be a severe blow to their ability to reach max Hyper. But in addition to that, should it become empowered, it gains plus 3 power and becomes level 2. Or in other words, should your opponent try to block it with a block card, you can make it a standard level 2 attack in both cost and power, in addition to forcing them to pay 2 key to keep their block card in place. If your opponent isn't so fussed on reaching max Hyper, 3 damage can just be shrugged off. But if they are, it's a high price to pay to maintain their current Hyper. Today we look at a new Carter, Breaker, and Attack card for Mark. Some of today's cards are going to be pretty interesting in the long run, so let's get started. Impact Form 1 is a new red Hyper Accelerating Carter. Instead of being tied to an effect, Impact Form 1 is directly tied to combat itself. Your attacks gain a hit effect to raise your Hyper X, where X is their level. Now this means your level 0 attacks still won't raise your Hyper, but your level 2 attacks can raise your Hyper 2. It also means that your Hyper attacks, should they hit, recharge your Hyper meter to 1/3 of its natural maximum capacity. This also assists Mark's Supreme Chokeslam into Supreme Crusher play. Chokeslam can be performed on 6 Hyper instead of 7, since it will raise his Hyper 2 naturally, then hit for the 9th Hyper and stun your opponent, fully setting up Crusher. If you're familiar with Olaturno paired with Rejuvenation Form 1, Impact Form 1 is pretty similar in terms of results. The harder you lean into level 1 attacks, the better results you gain. The difference being red typically likes more level 1 and higher attacks than blue, so Impact Form 1 will raise your Hyper more regularly than Olaturno will heal you. Completing the new cycle of Breaker cards is Tenacious Guard. Tenacious Guard has most of the trappings of the current cycle of Breaker cards, but has a secondary effect. To start with, it has the standard clause: prevent the next 3 combat damage your opponent's current attack would inflict. However, if Tenacious Guard prevents all remaining damage, it gets sent to your key pool. With Mark's ability to prevent 1 combat damage natively, Tenacious Guard's effect is being set off pretty much all the time. An attack would have to inflict 7+ combat damage to push Tenacious Guard into a position where if it is revealed as combat damage, it might not give full effects. And even then, it's just if it's revealed as the first card of combat damage. Secondly, if you use Tenacious Guard as payment for an attack, it's removed from the game. It's a one-time deal, unless you could work around it. Tenacious Guard is great as a general use breaker card, easily one of the best. Can't go wrong with Key Ramp, especially in the constructed format where both key flow forms come into play. High Knife Hand Chop is a level 1 4-power punch with Chip 2 and Hit Raise Your Hyper 2. Not the most complex card in the world, but it does its job. Unless your opponent can block it with an effect, it deals 2 damage regardless via Chip. If it hits, with Mark's stock configuration, 5 combat damage, raise your Hyper 2, then another 1 from Impact Form 1. That's 1/3 of your way to max Hyper. High Knife Hand Chop ultimately serves as a great burst of Hyper and block punishment. Gaining 2 Hyper in one shot can be game changing, especially if your opponent has no way to get an EX fighter back down, so they want to block it, meaning your other attacks have a greater chance of hitting, and High Knife Hand Chop does 2 chip damage to boot. It can be even more potent with burst fighters, since their transformation into a hyper fighter is automatic. Just something to ponder. Thank you for watching today's preview video for Hyper Juken's second set, Power Surge. Remember to like, subscribe and share to keep up to date with Hyper Juken news and content. Come back next time when we cycle back to Louise and learn just what makes her the best around.